Exotic weapon catalysts are integral transformative pieces that often convert mediocre weapons into much better versions of themselves or simply add the cherry on top to an already strong weapon. Think things like autoloading holster for Witherhoard or whispered breathing. And sometimes they add completely new features to the weapon that weren't originally there, like the supercharged Scepter, for example. Unfortunately though, there are still 27 exotic weapons that do not have a catalyst. So today, I'm trying out a different style of video where I'll be bringing you my ideas for each and every exotic weapon that's missing a catalyst. I've tried my best to approach all of these from what I imagine a game developer would also do, so I haven't made anything absurdly overpowered, but some of my ideas do add some extra spice that I'm sure will leave you wanting them. So without further ado, let's begin with Wishender. Wishender's intended purpose is for breaking shields, and to complement this playstyle, my idea for its catalyst would be to make it so breaking a combatant shield grants the weapon faster draw time for a short duration, that would also work on barrier champion shields as well. This would work the exact same as the secondary trait for Wishkeeper that grants the same bonus for damaging suspended targets instead. Next up we have the Chaperone, and in truth this weapon sees little to no use in PvE and is far more of a PvP powerhouse instead. So I think giving it the perk Overflow as its catalyst is a nice idea since it removes the need to manually reload it in PvP. Moving on to our next weapon, we have the Last Word, a classic PvP hand cannon that I think would benefit really well from the perk Offhand Strike as its catalyst. Offhand Strike is a hipfire only perk that basically increases your range by about 45% and gives an extra 30 stability as well as some other bonuses. But the main idea is that it's hipfire only, and given that the Last Word is all about hipfire, I think this is a perfect catalyst for it. So for any PvP players, let me know what you think in the comments. Bastion is up next, and it actually received a pretty big buff recently where they essentially gave it both Trench Barrel and 1-2 Punch, which makes it pretty good for special weapon total damage. I do have a video that goes into more detail about this if you're curious, but in my opinion, the cherry on top would be to add Kinetic Tremors as its catalyst, since for one, it's the only kinetic fusion rifle in the game, and two, it won't make it game breaking, it'll simply add more versatility. Conditional Finality is next, and it's here that I've gotten a little creative. Basically, my idea here is to introduce a double fire mode, triggered by holding reload that lets you fire both rounds at once, costing 2 ammo of course, causing a freeze and ignition simultaneously. This would burn through your ammo twice as fast, but you would also deal twice as much damage. And also, if you take a look in game, whenever you fire a round from the weapon, the exhaust is depleted from that respective side, meaning that this is 100% possible thematically. To me, this sounds like a super fun catalyst, but do let me know what you think. Next we have Khvostov, and to me, the most fitting perk to add here would be Attrition Orbs, since collecting an Orb of Power grants the full 7 stacks of Eyes Up Guardian, and Khvostov also features Shootaloo, which is just perfect synergy. And I'm also not willing to hide the fact that this is one of my favorite weapons in the entire game. Pair this catalyst with Kinetic Siphon, and you'll literally never run out of Eyes Up Guardian and be shredding everything in sight. Following that, we have another final shape weapon, Euphony. In order to fully maximize the effectiveness of Euphony, you want to build around spawning Threadlings as often as you can. So my idea for its catalyst is twofold. Firstly, I would increase the rate at which it spawns Threadlings versus a single target like a boss, and also give it the perk Hatchling to give it some more flexibility for dealing with less healthy targets like orange bars or mini bosses. There was a lot of hype around Euphony when it first came out, but admittedly it is overshadowed by quite a lot of other options, so I think this catalyst would give it some fresh relevance. Next up we have Wavesplitter, and similar to Khvostov, this weapon relies entirely on consistent orb generation to make sure it's at its maximum power mode at all times. So I think the perfect catalyst for it would have to be Shootaloo, since with Void Siphon you can shoot the orb you make after a double kill and then you're straight into maximum power without having the hassle of running to the orb itself. Wavesplitter is honestly a pretty underrated weapon, and this catalyst would for sure make me want to use it more. Moving on we have Tarrabah, a mostly forgotten raid exotic that could really use some love. For starters, before we get into anything catalyst related, I would make it so the Ravenous Beast meter doesn't reset upon stowing the weapon and can generate charge from receiving damage even while stowed. It makes no sense why it still hasn't been changed to behave this way with weapons like Still Hunt that passively generate their own meter through means that don't require the weapon to be held at all times. So my idea for its catalyst involves bringing in some Solar 3.0 synergy to make it compete with the likes of incandescent weapons. My idea is to make it so bullets fired while Ravenous Beast is active apply Scorch stacks, and then defeating scorched enemies partially reloads the magazine. This would feed into the fantasy of it being an absolute bullet hose while Ravenous Beast is active, while also giving it some really nice Solar 3.0 synergy. It's honestly a really cool weapon that's been held back by poor balancing decisions, so I hope one day we can see this changed. Divinity is next, and my idea for its catalyst would be to make it so allied damage to the Divinity cage partially refills the magazine for the Divinity user. Now you might say, well, doesn't Xenophage Mask do that already? And yeah, it does, but since the nerf it caught in the final shape, it no longer has the ability to reload the entire reserves without reloading like it used to. So combining this idea plus Xenophage would make that interaction happen again for a perfect reload-free div experience. Next up we have Devil's Ruin, which is honestly a bit of a meme gun with it being a sidearm laser pistol, so I think it's a good idea to lean further into the meme aspect and make it so kills with the laser extend the duration of the laser as its catalyst. To me, this seems like an awfully technical catalyst to achieve, but I think it would be super fun to just keep firing the laser so long as there are kills to be had, and it would 100% see a ton more use if this was the case. Now we move on to the class exotic Glaives, and I want to give credit to Tuber from the Discord server here, since he suggested that after scoring a projectile kill, each Glaive should emit an elemental burst of the matching damage type when Glaive energy is full. For solar, it would be Cure ×2, Overshield for Void, and Galvanic Armor for Arc. I think this is a great idea to give the Glaives themselves some nice added perks outside of their main hold reload perks like the Bubble and Turret, and it would certainly get me to fetch them out of my vault. Now we have Collective Obligation, and I'm going to go a little wild on this one by suggesting that the core of the weapon should be changed to behave like Tessellation, where the energy type of it matches that of your equipped super, and then the weapon would also be able to leech the debuffs that correspond to that respective element. So if I was running a Strand super, for example, Collective Obligation would become Strand Burn and be able to leech, unravel, sever, and suspend. Come to think of it, I don't know how leeching suspend would work, but perhaps it could prime the target like Metiodoxia does, and then once the target dies, it releases a suspending explosion. Similarly for solar, it could leech Scorch, blind and jolt for arc, and slow and freeze for stasis. Definitely a wild suggestion, but it was too good not to include. Now we come to Still Hunt, and personally, I think a really good catalyst for it would be to kinda treat it like Izanagi's Burden by giving it Sniper's Meditation. Sniper's Meditation is of course the sniper rifle specific artifact perk this season that increases the damage of all sniper rifles by up to 15% after landing several consecutive precision hits, and I think that giving this perk to only Still Hunt would make up for the extremely harsh nerfs it received just a couple months ago, and would reward precisely placed shots. Plus, I really want Solo Witness to be possible again, so maybe this could help with that. Worldline Zero already has a catalyst, but it's pretty average. All it does is make Temporal Sprint activate half a second faster, so I'm breaking the rule of the video here for a second just to say that it deserves Eager Edge as a reworked catalyst, since I'm sure a lot of you can agree it would commemorate its legacy perfectly. Back to weapons without catalyst now. Next, we have 1000 Voices. And similar to Still Hunt, my idea for 1k is to give it the super old artifact perk Particle Deconstruction. As a reminder, Particle Deconstruction made it so dealing fusion rifle damage to a boss applied a unique buff that increased incoming fusion and linear fusion rifle damage by an additional 40%, which was absolutely absurd. And I would still keep the buff as unique to let it stack with Tractor, Well, and Surges, though I wouldn't go as high as 40%. I think 15% is a nice balanced number that would see enough return usage of fusions and linear fusions alike, since right now neither is used for anything really, and it would pay tribute to one of the most fun artifact perks ever created. Next up we have the Queenbreaker, and for me the catalyst it needs is dead simple. Simply make holding reload allow you to swap between both scopes and then give it triple tap. You might not know this, but Queenbreaker did receive a buff recently, and it's now very comparable to Sleeper Simulant in terms of both DPS and total damage, so it actually isn't that bad, and triple tap plus scope swapping flexibility would certainly raise it to new heights. Speeding through the next few options, for Anarchy I would simply allow Link Traps to apply the Jolt debuff for a little extra damage and Overload stun. For Truth I would give it aggressive tracking completely identical to how it was in Destiny 1, and for Xenophage the perfect catalyst would be Field Prep for some extra reserves and better reload speed while crouching. Moving on we have Salvation's Grip, a rather strange weapon that despite receiving numerous buffs really doesn't see much use, so my idea is to completely rework the firing mode. You would still have regular grenade launcher rounds for tap firing, but I would add a hold reload functionality that allows you to swap the fully charged shot between all three Touch of Winter stasis grenades, so the Glacier, Cold Snap, and Dustfield grenades. I think this would make the weapon far more unique while still retaining the functions it carries out currently. On to the last remaining 6, we first have Eyes of Tomorrow, and it actually received a pretty nice buff where killing at least 4 marked enemies fully refunds the rocket back, though sadly you still have to reload this returned rocket manually. So my idea for the catalyst would simply be to make it so kills while adaptive ordnance is active also refill the magazine. For the Lament, I honestly wasn't too inspired, so I've opted to suggest the perk Flash Counter that applies a 20% debuff to a target after blocking a melee attack, and I don't think this would be too broken and just gives Lament a little extra damage plus letting it compete with Wolfpack legendary swords. Up next we have Parasite, and I'm sure your immediate thought is autoloading holster, as was mine. Though after considering it, solar holster already checks that box, so instead my idea for the catalyst would be to make it so getting a certain amount of kills, say 10, from any source while the weapon is stowed would auto-reload it. Functionally, this would work the same as Envious Assassin, but without the overflow portion and with the freedom of ability kills as well. Final 3 now, and we're starting with Deterministic Chaos. And to be honest, I don't think a catalyst on its own can save this sorry excuse for an exotic, but I'd have to give it 4th times the charm, since it fits the design of its main perk quite nicely. For Winterbite, I actually have a pretty cool idea where I would make it so the Crystal Ball Detonation detonation creates an enormous status shockwave that freezes targets in a large radius. Winterbite doesn't really see that much use, so having something that increases its crowd control ability would certainly spice things up a little. Finally, for the 27th weapon without a catalyst, we have the recently released Microcosm. Much like how Aga's Scepter works, my idea is to have a similar catalyst that lets you hold reload to consume your entire Transcendence meter to supercharge the weapon for 20 seconds, making the beam apply slow, sever, scorch, weaken, and jolt all at the same time for the duration of this mode. If you combo this with the 20% damage buff the weapon gets after exiting your super, this would actually make Microcosm a very meta weapon for damage and team support. And at the cost of your entire Transcendence meter, I think this is entirely fair. So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed my suggestions, but if you think you've got a better idea for the exotics mentioned, do leave a comment covering your thought process. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. I'll see you in the next one. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Your support means the world. And if you're really into the content I create, consider becoming a member of the channel, which not only lets you support me in the best way possible, it also nets you a whole host of awesome perks along with it. A massive shout out to these members up on screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.